Pride and Prejudice plot. Mr. Bennet has five unmarried daughters. One day, a man called Mr. Bingley comes to live in the area, so she is sure that he will be the perfect husband for Jane, the eldest Miss Bennet. Then Mr. Darcy, a proud man, comes to stay with Bingley. Elizabeth Bennet doesn't think that some of Bennet's daughters would be good enough for him. She dislikes Mr. Darcy immediately. She prefers handsome soldier George Wickham, but he's not what he seems to be. The characters.
Fitzwilliam Darcy, a wealthy, proud man who falls in love with Elizabeth and reveals a generous, thoughtful nature beneath his somewhat stiff demeanor. George Wickham, a handsome and personable fortune hunter who Elizabeth is initially attracted. He eventually runs off with and he is forced to marry Lydia. Mr. Collins, Mr. Bennet's ridiculous cousin, who will inherit Longbourn after Mr. Bennet's death, upon Lady Catherine de Bourgh's recommendation. He seeks a bride, first proposing to Elizabeth and then to Charlotte Lucas.
Lady Catherine de Bourgh is the woman that Mr. Collins is always talking about. She's a rich, bossy noblewoman, Mr. Collins' patron and Darcy's aunt. Lady Catherine epitomizes class snobbery, especially in her attempts to order the middle-class Elizabeth away from her nephew. Mr. Bennet is a gentleman of modest income with five unmarried daughters. Mr. Bennet has a sarcastic and cynical sense of humor that he used to purposefully irritate his wife. Though he loves his daughters, Elizabeth in particular, he often fails as a parent, preferring to withdraw from the never-ending marriage concerns of the women around him rather than offer help. Mr. Bingley is Darcy's considerably best friend, and Bingley's purchase of Netherfield, an estate near the Bennets. He is a genial, well-intentioned gentleman, whose easygoing nature contrasts with Darcy's innately discourteous demeanor. He is blissfully uncaring about the class differences.
Mrs. Bennet is the Mr. Bennet's wife, a foolish, noisy woman whose only goal in life is to see her daughters married. Because of her low breeding and often unbecoming behavior, Mrs. Bennet often repels the very suitors whom she tries to attract for her daughters. Elizabeth Bennet, the novel's protagonist, the second daughter of Mr. Bennet, Elizabeth is the most intelligent and sensible of the five Bennet sisters. She is well-read and quick-witted, with a tongue that occasionally proves too sharp for her own good. Her realization of Darcy's essential goodness eventually triumphs over her initial prejudice against him. Also, Mary Bennet is the pretentious third Bennet daughter, who prefers reading over socializing.
Jane Bennet, the oldest and the most beautiful Bennet sister, Jane is more reserved and gentler than Elizabeth. The easy playfulness with which she and Brinkle interact contrasts strikingly with the mutual distaste that marked the encounter between Elizabeth and Darcy. Lydia Bennet, the Bennet's immature and irresponsible youngest daughter, Mr. Bennet's favorite, she shocks the family by running away with Wickham. Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's sensible and intelligent friend, who disappoints Elizabeth by marrying Mr. Collins for money and security.
But what's the meaning of the title?
Pride and Prejudice at first sight is an obvious representation of the two main characters in the book, Darcy and Elizabeth. Darcy presents pride in his every move, especially at the beginning of the book, where he calls Elizabeth tolerable and not handsome enough to him. Elizabeth holds a prejudice about Darcy from this day on. But Austen could possibly be making a claim about upper middle class society of the time. These traits seem to create the whole theme of the book. They create the witty scenarios displayed throughout it.
We can find any reference of the book in the media. We found a novel in Brazil made by Marcos Bain, and the name of this novel is Pride and Passion, and it was inspired in the book Pride and Prejudice. The novel will talk about a family where the mother has a dream of marrying all five daughters.
Various critics have consistently noted that the plot development of Pride and Prejudice is determined by character. Coincidence exerts a major influence, but turns of action are precipitated by character. Although human weakness is a prominent element, ranging from Miss Bingley's jealousy to Elizabeth's blind prejudice, outright evil is little in evidence. Austen maintains an attitude of good-humored irony toward her characters.